Colonel laughs at black little girls firing range requests until she broke every SEAL shooting record. He shook his head in disbelief at 12-year-old Lila Grant's quiet, earnest request to practice on the base's shooting range. His grin was mocking, voice laced with derision as he told the gathered soldiers, "Kids like you should stick to schoolbooks, not rifles you can't even lift." What Rivers failed to see was that these weren't childish daydreams. Lila carried the weight of a family legacy, a line of Army sharpshooters whose exploits had once been legend, though nearly forgotten. Her father, before he died overseas, had spent years patiently teaching her everything he knew: breath control, discipline, the calm of true aim. So when Lila stood her ground and asked for a single chance to prove herself, the captain's laughter faded into uneasy silence. At the range, with soldiers watching skeptically, her shots carved perfect holes through distant targets, one after another, breaking base records no one thought could fall. The hush that followed was more than shock. It was the dawning realization that greatness doesn't ask permission, and true legacy never really dies. Before we dive back in, let us know where you're watching from. And if this story resonates with you, be sure to hit subscribe. I've got something truly special waiting for you tomorrow. The old pickup rumbled along the cracked road that led to Fort Crest, the Army base rising in a patchwork of brick and concrete against the Charleston skyline. The humid air pressed in on the cab like a heavy blanket, but 12-year-old Lila Grant barely noticed. She sat rigid in the passenger seat, her fingers wrapped around a set of battered dog tags that had once clinked reassuringly against her father's chest. It was the anniversary of his death. They passed the checkpoint with a solemn nod from the guard who recognized them. The base was alive with motion. Soldiers in pressed uniforms marched crisply in formation, their boots striking the pavement in perfect rhythm. Jeeps loaded with supplies growled as they rolled by, dust rising in lazy curls behind them. Orders barked in clipped voices, training whistles pierced the thick summer air. It all felt at once familiar and impossibly distant. Lila's mother parked near the main admin building and shut off the engine. She turned, her eyes weary but gentle. "You don't have to do this today, baby." But Lila only shook her head, gripping the tags tighter. "I do." Together they walked across the sun-bleached lot toward the range office. The building loomed larger with every step, the brown doors swinging open to reveal soldiers lounging, laughing at shared jokes only they understood. At the counter, Captain Rivers leaned back in his chair, boots propped up, tapping a pen idly on a clipboard. He glanced at them, arching a brow with lazy disinterest. Lila cleared her throat, summoning all the strength in her small frame. "Sir, I'd like permission to use the range today, to honor my father." The room seemed to hush for just a moment. Rivers lowered his boots to the floor, the chair creaking. A smirk twitched at the corner of his mouth as he scanned her slight form. "You want to what?" "I want to shoot," Lila said evenly. A bark of laughter broke the moment. A couple of soldiers snickered behind her. Rivers shook his head slowly, drawing it out for effect. "Kid, this isn't a playground. Maybe go play with dolls or read a book. Leave the range to people who know what they're doing." Heat bloomed in Lila's cheeks. She swallowed hard. Her mother put a calming hand on her shoulder, but Lila felt the tremor in that touch. She wanted to scream, to throw the dog tags in Rivers' face and demand respect, but she didn't. She turned on her heel and walked out, jaw set, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Outside, the sun was merciless. Lila sank onto the concrete step beside the door, staring at the ground. Dust clung to her sneakers. The voices from inside drifted out in cruel, careless fragments of laughter. She bit her lip until it hurt. Slowly, her mind drifted away from the sounds of mockery to a different world entirely. She was back in the fields behind their old house. Her father stood behind her, one steadying hand on her shoulder. "Breathe, Lila," he'd say. "Feel the wind. Don't fight it. Work with it." She remembered the weight of the rifle in her arms, too long at first, too heavy, but becoming familiar over time. She remembered the smell of cut grass and his soft chuckle when she asked if he thought she could really do it. "It's in your blood," he'd whispered. "It's who you are." The memory steadied her. Back in the present, she lifted her head slowly, blinking away the threat of tears. She opened her palm, the dog tags glinting in the fierce light. Her heart pounded not with fear now, but with certainty. Lila stood, brushing the dust from her pants. She turned back toward the door. She would ask again. And this time, there would be no doubt she meant it. Captain Rivers leaned back in his chair and folded his arms across his chest, exchanging a knowing smirk with Lieutenant Avery, who stood at his side. The heat of the Charleston afternoon clung to the walls of the range office, and the stale smell of old coffee and gun oil filled the cramped space. "All right, Grant," Rivers drawled, dragging out her name as if savoring every letter. "One chance. That's all you get." He turned to Avery with a grin that said, "Watch this." Lila Grant stood opposite them, her mother at her shoulder, the dog tags in her palms slick with sweat. She didn't flinch at his tone. She didn't blink at the smirks or the half-stifled snickers of the soldiers loitering near the door, who'd wandered over the moment they realized there was going to be a show. She nodded once. "One chance is all I need." Rivers barked a short laugh. "Look at you. So sure. All right then. Let's not keep the crowd waiting." Word spread like wildfire. By the time they made their way from the office to the range, there were at least 20 soldiers trailing behind, some openly mocking, others just curious to see the embarrassment they were sure would unfold. They emerged onto the shooting range, a long, sun-bleached strip of land lined with wooden partitions and scorched dirt. Targets stood like silent witnesses at various distances, paper and steel alike. The air was heavy with the acrid bite of spent powder. Lila walked ahead of them, her steps measured, her face a mask of calm that belied the fury and fear churning in her belly. She could hear the men behind her making bets, one offering a candy bar to anyone willing to bet she'd even hit the target. "She gonna hold the rifle the right way?" someone called out. "Bet she drops it on recoil." Captain Rivers called them to order, waving for quiet, but he couldn't hide the smirk tugging at his mouth. "Clear the line. Let's give our little sharpshooter room." Lila approached the rifle stand where an M4 rested. It was almost as big as she was, black metal gleaming in the harsh sun. She reached out, her fingers curling around the grip with the easy familiarity of 100 secret lessons. Her mother stood back, fists clenched at her sides, eyes glistening but fierce. She didn't say a word. Rivers cleared his throat. "Anytime you're ready, Grant." The murmurs behind her quieted slightly, curiosity battling amusement. Lila didn't rush. She set her feet exactly as her father had taught her. Left foot slightly forward, right heel grounded. She settled the rifle into her shoulder, cheek resting on the stock. She inhaled through her nose, slow and deep, the heat and sweat forgotten. "Breathe, Lila." She heard him like he was there beside her, voice low and steady. "Wind's nothing. Let it move you. Let it move with you." Her fingers settled on the trigger. "Don't snatch. Squeeze." She exhaled. The shot cracked, echoing across the range. Dead center. For a full breath, there was nothing but the echo. Then a ripple moved through the crowd, hushed words, a strangled laugh that wasn't really a laugh at all. Captain Rivers frowned, glancing at the hole punched clean through the bullseye. He licked his lips, clearly not prepared to see it. "Lucky shot," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Lila didn't even look at him. She cycled the rifle, adjusted her stance. Her heart was beating so hard it felt like it would crack her ribs, but her hands were steady. "Again, baby girl. Every shot counts. Don't let the first be your last." She took another breath. Squeezed. The second shot cut the bullseye nearly in half. Silence this time. No laughter. No betting. She lowered the rifle slowly, listening to the wind stir the grass at the range's edge. Captain Rivers opened his mouth, closed it, shifted on his feet. His face was red now, the smirk burned away. Behind him, the soldiers weren't jeering anymore. A sergeant she didn't know murmured, "Did you see that grouping?" Another whistled under his breath, shaking his head in grudging admiration. Lieutenant Avery coughed awkwardly. "Captain." Rivers snapped out of his daze. He swallowed. "Reload." "Do it again." She did. Again and again, her shots rang out, each one as deliberate as the last, each grouping so tight it looked impossible. The smell of powder filled her lungs, and in those moments, she wasn't a 12-year-old girl on a base that didn't want her. She was her father's daughter, the inheritor of a legacy written in brass casings and whispered lessons at dusk. As the last shot fell silent, she lowered the rifle and let out the breath she didn't know she'd been holding. She turned to face them. Rivers was silent. His jaw worked, words refusing to come. Around him, the soldiers had stopped their mockery entirely. Some were nodding. A few clapped softly, uncertain at first, then louder as more joined in. Her mother approached quietly, tears finally spilling over. She wrapped Lila in a fierce hug, but didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Rivers finally managed to speak, his voice rough. "Who taught you that?" Lila looked him straight in the eye, her voice steady. "My father." He flinched at that. His gaze flickered to the dog tags around her neck, the initials stamped into the battered metal. He cleared his throat again. "Well," he managed finally, his voice unsteady. "I guess you can shoot." Someone in the crowd snorted. "That's one way of putting it." But Lila didn't smile. She didn't need to. She just nodded once. Because she knew. And now, they knew too. Respect wasn't given. It was earned, one perfect shot at a time. The sun had long passed its hottest blaze by the time the message came. Captain Rivers found them near the edge of the range, Lila cleaning the rifle with careful, practiced motions while her mother sat on an overturned crate, eyes rimmed red from tears she refused to let fall in front of these men. Rivers' face was a study in discomfort. He cleared his throat, glancing at the soldiers who watched from a respectful distance now. Their laughter and taunts from earlier vanished like mist. "General Navarro wants to see you," he said stiffly. Lila paused mid-wipe, glancing up. Her mother straightened. "The general himself?" Rivers nodded. He didn't say why, but he didn't have to. The silence between them was thick with something unspoken. They followed him past the range, past the motor pool where mechanics wiped grime from their hands to stare curiously, through the main admin building where word had already spread. The hush that fell as they walked said it all. When they reached the door marked Commanding Officer, Rivers stopped. He hesitated before turning the knob. For the first time all day, he looked directly at Lila. His voice was quiet. "Don't speak unless spoken to. Be respectful." Lila nodded once. She didn't need to be told. Inside, the office was cool, the walls lined with old photographs of the base in decades past. Campaign maps and plaques covered one side. A large desk sat beneath a heavy green-shaded lamp. Behind it sat General Navarro. He was an older man, but not in a way that suggested frailty. His eyes were sharp beneath silver hair cropped close to the scalp, and his uniform seemed to carry the weight of 100 battles. He didn't rise as they entered. He simply looked up, pen paused mid-signature. Rivers cleared his throat. "General, Grant and her mother, as requested." Navarro waved him off without looking. "Leave us." Rivers swallowed. "Yes, sir." He closed the door softly behind him. Silence filled the room. The general set his pen down and folded his hands before him. For a long moment, he simply regarded Lila. His gaze wasn't unkind, but it was unflinching. She held it, refusing to drop her eyes. Her mother shifted beside her, glancing nervously between them. Finally, Navarro spoke. "You're Lila Grant." "Yes, sir." He leaned back slightly. 12 years old. "Yes, sir." He nodded slowly. "You're the one who embarrassed half my marksmanship instructors this morning." Lila felt her mother tense, but she didn't look away. "I just shot the best I could, sir." A flicker of something, approval, amusement, crossed his eyes, gone as quickly as it came. He reached to his side, pulling a battered olive-green folder from a stack. It was held together with a fraying elastic band, its edges softened by age and use. He laid it flat on the desk and undid the band. "Do you know what this is?" he asked, voice low. Lila shook her head once. He opened it carefully. Inside were yellowed papers, commendations with official seals, and photographs so old the edges had begun to curl. Black and white shots of men in fatigues, rifles slung, grinning with the easy camaraderie of soldiers. Navarro slid one photo toward her. It showed a young black soldier standing in front of a range, rifle cradled in his arms, an unmistakable steel in his eyes. Lila's breath caught. She knew that face. "My father," she whispered. Navarro nodded. "Sergeant Major Elijah Grant. Finest marksman I ever saw come through this base. And he wasn't the first." He gestured at the folder. "This is your family's record. Your grandfather, great-uncle, uncles. They were legends once. Army trusted them for missions that never made the news. Shot placement so precise, it saved entire platoons. But these things get lost over time. New wars, new heroes." Lila swallowed hard. She traced her fingers along the faded photograph but didn't pick it up. Her mother's hand hovered over her shoulder like she wanted to hold her, but was too afraid to break the moment. Navarro's voice was softer now. "Your father trained you, didn't he?" Lila's voice cracked only a little. "Yes, sir. Since I was 7. He watched her with that same unblinking intensity. He wasn't supposed to do that on the record. Army doesn't exactly encourage minors with rifles. But I knew your father. He wasn't the type to follow rules if it meant leaving his daughter unprepared for the world." Silence fell again. The walls seemed to press in with the weight of history. Navarro closed the folder carefully and rested his palm on it. "Listen to me, Lila. This isn't about making fools of cocky range officers. This isn't about proving a point to men who should have known better." He leaned forward, voice dropping. "This is about legacy." about carrying forward something that meant everything to those who came before you. She felt the tears pricking at the corners of her eyes, but held them back. Her mother spoke for the first time, voice shaking. "Sir, she's just a child." Navarro didn't look at her mother. He kept his gaze on Lila. "No, she's a soldier's daughter, and she's better on that range than men twice her age who call themselves professionals." He paused. When he spoke next, it was almost gentle. "I'm not in the business of wasting talent. I don't care how old you are, what color your skin is, or what anyone in that yard thinks." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a single sheet of paper with a red stamp at the bottom. He turned it so it faced her. "This is an invitation. We run a youth training initiative for exceptional cases, usually 16 to 18. But for you, I'm willing to make an exception. You train among the best instructors, the best resources. No shortcuts, no special treatment." He let the words settle. Lila blinked slowly. Her mouth felt dry. She swallowed. Navarro's voice softened even more. "This is your choice, Lila. No one will force you. You can say no and walk out that door, and no one will think less of you." She looked at the photograph of her father, at the file of men who shared her blood, their eyes hard but proud. She lifted her gaze and met the general's. "I want it," she said quietly but firmly. Navarro nodded, something like approval warming his flinty expression. He extended his hand. She took it, her small fingers swallowed by his calloused grip. "Welcome to the program," he said. And just like that, the legend wasn't lost anymore. It was reborn. They left Fort Crest without speaking. The engine rumbled low as Lila and her mother drove through Charleston's winding streets, the weight of the meeting with General Navarro pressing heavy on their shoulders. Lila sat stiffly in the passenger seat, the folder of old photographs Navarro had given them resting in her lap. Her fingers absently traced the edges, feeling every brittle line. She didn't dare open it yet. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windshield, glinting off the dog tags hanging around her neck. She could see her mother's grip on the wheel was white-knuckled, her jaw tight enough to ache. Eventually, they turned off the main road and followed a narrower lane lined with ancient oaks draped in Spanish moss. The world here seemed quieter, slower. They parked at the edge of a small park where the live oaks created a cathedral of green overhead, their roots like gnarled hands grasping the earth. Lila didn't wait for her mother to say anything. She opened the door and climbed out, clutching the folder to her chest. She walked a few paces away and stood beneath a tree, staring at the ground, fighting the sting in her eyes. Her mother joined her slowly, the gravel crunching beneath cautious steps. For a long moment, there was only the hush of wind through the moss and the distant chirp of cicadas. "Lila," her mother finally whispered, voice ragged. Lila didn't turn. "You never told me." The words weren't angry, just tired, hurt. Her mother sighed, the sound weighted by years of secrets. She reached out and rested a hand on Lila's shoulder. "I wanted to. God knows I wanted to. But I thought, if you didn't know, you wouldn't follow. That maybe you'd choose something safer, something easier." Lila swallowed hard. Her throat felt tight as she blinked away the blur in her vision. "But Dad trained me," she said, voice shaking. "He wanted me to know." Her mother's hand trembled. "I know. I watched him. Every night in those fields. I heard the shots. I heard his voice teaching you how to breathe, how to see the wind, how to wait. I wanted to stop him so many times." She paused, her breath catching. "But I couldn't." Silence fell again. When her mother spoke next, her voice was low and raw. "He came from a line of sharpshooters, Lila. Your grandfather, his brothers, men whose skills saved lives. They weren't just soldiers, they were legends. But legends have a cost. They go to war and don't always come back." Lila squeezed the folder tighter against her chest. Her mother's eyes shone with unshed tears. "He didn't want that for you. He wanted you to know how to survive. But me? I didn't want to see you become him. I didn't want to lose you too." A sob threatened to break through, but Lila clamped her jaw shut. Her voice trembled with anger and grief. "But he believed in me." "I know," her mother whispered, voice breaking at last. A tear slid down her cheek. "He saw it in you. The gift, the discipline, the heart." Lila turned to face her fully, tears finally falling unchecked. She reached up and wiped her face with the back of her hand, her father's dog tags clinking against her chest. "I'm going to do it," she said fiercely. "I'm going to carry it forward. Not for the army, not for them, for him, for you, for all of them." Her mother's lips trembled. She pulled Lila into her arms and held her tightly, their tears mingling in the hush of the old park. And as the wind whispered through the moss, Lila silently vowed she would never let that legacy die. Weeks later, Lila Grant stood before the gates of Fort Crest again, but this time everything felt different. She wasn't here as a visitor with tear-filled eyes and trembling resolve. She wore the simple olive-drab uniform of a trainee, her hair pulled back tight. No frills, no softness. The sun pressed down on the assembled recruits in the courtyard, turning the world into a furnace of sweating faces and shuffling boots. They stood in rows, older boys mostly, a few hard-eyed girls. Many had the rangy strength of farm kids or the thick muscle of city gyms. All of them eyed her as she joined the line at the end, a slip of a 12-year-old with dark, determined eyes and the battered dog tags glinting at her chest. Some smirked, elbows nudging. "Look at the mascot," one boy whispered. "She's gonna cry by noon," another said, not even bothering to lower his voice. Lila didn't look at them. She stared straight ahead, hands clenched at her sides, her father's voice in her mind. "Stand like you mean it. No one respects a slouch." The instructors arrived, boots slamming the ground in unison. Silence fell like a guillotine blade. Sergeant Torres was a wiry man with a face carved in granite. He wasted no time. "Listen up," he barked. "This is the Advanced Youth Training Initiative. You are here because someone up top thinks you're worth not wasting." He swept his gaze over them like a hawk over rabbits. "You will prove them right, or you'll leave. Understand?" A ragged chorus of "Yes, Sergeant," followed. His eyes found Lila. He paused just a heartbeat longer on her than on the others. But he said nothing. Training began immediately. There was no orientation, no gentle welcome, no pep talk. By midday, they were crawling through mud under barbed wire while instructors screamed for them to keep their heads down. Lila's uniform was too big in the shoulders and kept snagging, but she didn't stop. Breathe. They ran drills until her legs burned and wobbled. She fell once, scraping her knee bloody, and a boy behind her nearly trampled her trying to get past. He sneered, "Move it, runt." She did. They carried logs in teams through swampy ditches, her arms straining to keep her end from sinking. When they finished, they dropped to do push-ups in the wet earth. "Don't stop. Don't you dare stop." That first day ended with half the recruits slumped against the barracks wall, panting like dogs. Someone vomited into the grass. Lila sat with her arms wrapped around her knees, watching the sky fade from blistering blue to smoky twilight. Her chest heaved with exhaustion, but her eyes burned with something harder than fatigue. She hadn't cried. The second day was worse. Obstacle courses that chewed up her palms until they bled. Forced marches with packs that weighed half as much as she did. An older girl muttered, "She's gonna quit." "She has to." But Lila didn't quit. By the third day, the smirks were fewer. The instructors didn't ease up. Sergeant Torres stood over them in the dining hall, watching them choke down rations with dead-eyed weariness. He barked orders until they jumped. He called them out by name when they faltered. "Grant," he shouted one afternoon, pointing at her as she dropped from the pull-up bar. "Get back up." Her arms trembled. Her shoulders screamed. "No." She bit her lip, tasted blood, and obeyed. By the end of the week, she'd ripped open new blisters on her palms and wrapped them in torn cloth she kept hidden in her pocket. But then there was the range. At the range, everything changed. The first time she stepped onto the firing line with the others, there was laughter. "You gonna even see the target from down there?" one boy jeered. She ignored him. Sergeant Torres handed out rifles, his gaze cool and unreadable. "You have 5 rounds," he said. "Show me you belong here." The older kids shot well enough. A few impressive groupings drew nods. When Lila's turn came, the world shrank. The chatter faded. She felt the stock against her shoulder. "Breathe. Feel it. Don't fight the wind." She squeezed. The shot rang out. Dead center. A murmur rippled. Second shot. Another perfect placement. By the third, no one was laughing. By the fifth, the silence was reverent. Sergeant Torres approached her slowly. He took the rifle from her hands and examined the grouping on the distant paper. He didn't smile, but his eyes narrowed in that assessing way, as though reappraising her from the ground up. He gave the rifle back without a word and moved on. But after that day, no one called her mascot again. Training didn't get easier. The instructors pushed them to the edge of collapse daily. She was smaller, younger, and often the last to finish a march or climb. But at the range, she was the standard everyone measured themselves against. Some of the older kids began to seek her out quietly. "How'd you hold your breath so steady?" What's your sight picture look like? She'd shrug, awkward at first. Then she'd show them. At night, by firelight, she sat apart with her father's old range notes spread on her knees. They were cracked and stained from years in his pocket, the writing faded in places. She read them like scripture, whispering the words under her breath. Check wind drift. Slow exhale. Don't snatch. She could almost hear him. I'm proud of you, baby girl. She'd close her eyes and see his smile. Sometimes she'd cry then, quiet so no one would hear. But in the morning, her eyes would be dry, her jaw set. And day after day, respect grew. Not because of her name, not because of pity, but because every time she lifted that rifle, she proved she belonged. The sun was slipping behind the distant trees, setting the sky on fire with streaks of molten gold and bruised purple. The air smelled of warm grass and spent powder, a scent that clung to skin and refused to be washed away. Fort Crest was quiet now. The day's final test had ended hours earlier. Recruits had staggered back to barracks, muscles trembling from exhaustion, boots caked in drying mud. But Lila Grant stayed behind. She stood alone on the range, the world bathed in that hushed, reverent glow that only came right before true dark. The shooting benches cast long shadows that seemed to point at her, like accusing fingers or solemn witnesses. In her hand, she held the dog tags. Her father's name was pressed into the battered metal, each letter familiar as her own heartbeat. She ran her thumb over them slowly, feeling the shallow grooves where dirt and sweat had collected over years of wear. All day, the final test had pushed them all beyond breaking. Forced marches under the relentless sun. Low crawls through black mud that sucked at knees and elbows. Targets at impossible ranges when blowing in erratic, mocking gusts. She had finished every event. Not first. Sometimes dead last. But she had finished. And at the range? Even Sergeant Torres had watched her last grouping in silence, jaw tight, giving nothing away. But when he dismissed them, he hadn't told her to leave. He hadn't told her to stay either. So she stayed. The others were gone. The base seemed to exhale around her, engines winding down, distant shouts of instructors softened by distance. The cicadas sang their shrill hymn to the coming dark. She closed her eyes, pressing the tags hard enough against her chest to hurt. You did it, Daddy, she thought, blinking back hot tears. You taught me enough to get this far. But the words weren't enough. She opened her eyes and swallowed, the burn in her throat fierce. Slowly, she sank to one knee in the dirt. It was still warm from the day's heat, grit working into the fabric of her trousers. She bowed her head and held the tags to her lips. I promise, she whispered, voice cracking on the word. She had imagined this moment so many times during the training. When the pack was too heavy. When her arms trembled on the pull-up bar. When she wanted to scream at Torres to shut up and let her rest. She'd see his face in her memory. That knowing smile. The way he'd wipe sweat from his brow on those summer evenings in the field behind their house, rifle resting on his shoulder, telling her to slow down. You're trying too hard, Lila. Breathe. Let the world come to you. The tears spilled over now, unchecked. I promise I'll carry it, she choked. I'll carry it further than even you did. I'll make sure no one forgets what you taught me. What you were. The wind picked up, fluttering the loose hair at her temples. It hissed through the grass at the edge of the range, a sound like a sigh, like someone listening. She pulled the tags from her lips and gripped them so tight the chain bit into her fingers. Then she rose. Her body ached. Her blisters had long since burst and scabbed over. Every joint felt like it had sand in it. She walked to the bench where her rifle rested, the metal cold now in the cooling air. She picked it up with both hands, feeling the weight settle into her bones like a memory, like destiny. The target at the far end of the range was almost lost in the dusk. A smudge of pale paper pinned to the boards, dancing gently in the wind. She set her feet exactly as she'd been taught. Left forward, right back. She brought the stock to her shoulder and rested her cheek against it. The world shrank. The distant sounds of the base faded. No Sergeant Torres yelling corrections. No older recruits mocking her. No more fear. Just her breath. In. Out. She remembered his voice, clear as if he were standing right behind her. Let it all go. Anger. Doubt. Pride. None of that can aim for you. She breathed out slowly, her fingers settling on the trigger. This isn't for them. She felt the truth of it in her bones. This is for us. She squeezed. The crack split the hush of the range, echoing off the barracks walls, startling a flock of blackbirds from the trees. The shot flew true, so perfect it felt like it cut the air itself. For a moment after, there was nothing. No applause. No fanfare. Just the quiet rasp of the wind through grass, the slow deepening of shadow, and the smell of powder hanging like incense in the dying light. She lowered the rifle and let her arms fall to her sides, the weight of it suddenly gone, leaving only a fierce, aching pride. She didn't need anyone to tell her she'd earned it. She didn't need permission to be here. She had proved it to herself. She lifted the dog tags one last time, kissed them gently, and tucked them inside her shirt, close to her heart. Then, with the sky ablaze above her and the earth cool beneath her boots, Lila Grant turned and walked off the range alone. No one watching. No one cheering. Just the certainty that she would never be underestimated again. Because greatness didn't ask for permission, and she was ready to carry that truth forever. If you enjoyed Lila Grant's journey, please like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this. Tell us in the comments what you thought about how her story ended and how it made you feel. Rate the story on a scale of 10 and share where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. Your thoughts help us bring you even more meaningful tales of courage, legacy, and determination.